20 years ago, it was 1999. I was 22 years old, and I had just graduated from the University of St. Thomas, a Catholic school in a Catholic university in the Twin Cities. In January of that year, during a brunch following Sunday Mass, myself and a group of my classmates came up with a crazy idea. We were reminiscing about being suburban kids and how when school was out, when we were suburban kids going to elementary school, we would often ride our bikes over to our friends' houses. And so someone just threw out the crazy idea, wouldn't that be crazy when we all finish school here at college to all ride our bikes to so-and-so's house? Sounded like a fun idea. Well, for some reason, I took that idea and I went back to this group of seminarian classmates and I said, let's actually do that. Let's actually ride our bikes to each other's houses after we graduate from college. This was the beginning of one of the craziest projects that would not be the last, but probably the first that I began in my life. The day after I graduated, 20 years ago, I embarked with 12 of my seminarian classmates on a 1,400-mile biking trip across Minnesota, Wisconsin, taking a ferry across Lake Michigan, down through Michigan, and all the way down into Kentucky. We named it Biking for Jesus. When we came up with this brilliant idea towards the end of January, not one of the 12 of us had a bike, which then led to me running my first ever capital campaign. We raised $25,000 to support this ridiculous effort. We then made plans and maps. During this 14-day bike tour, we spent each night in a different parish, where we would then give talks on vocations, trying to rally different parishes across the Midwest to pray, consider, and think about promoting vocations to the priesthood and religious life. The name of our tour, Biking for Jesus, also was the very first time that I screen printed a t-shirt. Now you all know that this was a first of many. And what was in the back of that t-shirt? Today's gospel passage, Luke chapter 10. The harvest is abundant, but laborers are few. So ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for his harvest. It was our mission as young seminarians to go out and to encourage individuals to ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers. That was 20 years ago. Today, I stand before you unbelievably happy to be here. Why? Well, this weekend is the weekend that priests who had changes in assignments are standing for the first time before their Sunday assembly. 1/3 of the priests in our archdiocese have a new assignment this year. Of that third of priests, many of them have assignments where they are taking one or two previous assignments and combining them. For example, just south of us, Ben Seiberg was the pastor at St. Lawrence in Lawrenceburg. This Sunday, with the new Mass schedule, he is the pastor of St. Lawrence in Lawrenceburg and St. Mary's in Aurora. He is the first pastor in our diocese to be the pastor of 2 parish schools. But he won't be the last. When I say he won't be the last, I can say that with authority. Why? Because right now in our diocese, we have 94 diocesan priests that are under the age of retirement. In 11 years, in 2030, there will be 57. The harvest is abundant, but laborers are few. So what are we called to do? Ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers. Now, I think always first when we hear these numbers, there's those, like, how did this happen? Why are we at where we're at? Well, I'll give you just a few ramblings on why I believe we're at where we're at. I think there's, from my point of view, my vantage point, there are 4 reasons. Number 1, there was a great, and it was a good idea. It didn't work. But there was a great idea in the 60s and 70s that religious sisters and priests should try to be more like lay people. So religious priests and religious sisters and parish priests started living like the laity. They took off their habits, they removed their veils, they laxed their rigorous life. The problem with it is that their lives were then really no different than anybody else's, except for the fact that they did nice things for Jesus. The mystery, the heroic virtue, and the sense of otherness disappeared. And with this, their lives no longer seemed real attractive or something to strive for. Number 2, out of the Second Vatican Council, rightfully so, came a new spirit of ecumenism. The fact that we as Roman Catholics, as baptized Christians, have brothers and sisters that are Christians. And we should enter into relationship with them to try to get them to as well have the fullness of the faith and the fullness of the sacraments. What happened, though, is that often what got preached is that we're all the same. Or it doesn't really matter whether one is Catholic or Presbyterian, or really whether one is ever actually even religious. As long as you're a good person, as long as you're nice. And then this spirit of niceness and this spirit of ecumenism, there really was no longer a need for the church, because the church was just one of many ways that one could become a nice person. When there was no longer a dire need, why would I sacrifice for that? Third, after the Second World War, the seminaries and convents in America were packed. After seeing the horror of evil, many people wanted to change the world. They wanted the evil of World War II to not take place again. So many people were inspired to join the religious life, to teach, to educate, to heal, to save. Yet with a huge surplus of priests and religious in any other supply and demand chain, there came to be the question, well, if we have too many priests, why would I become a priest? There isn't a problem. For example, All Saints Parish. I am now the pastor of All Saints Parish, which used to be 4 parishes that had 4 priests. Yet somehow I'm able to do what 4 priests did previously. My first assignment was to 2 small parishes as a pastor, to 2 small parishes. One of them was St. Anne's, 80 families, and St. Joseph, 4 Corners, that had 140 families. At one time, there was 1 priest for each of these parishes. Eventually, I was to combine those 2 parishes with another parish of 500 families in a school. But at first, I was just assigned to St. Joseph and St. Anne's. I remember after being there for a little bit, I was bored, like terribly bored. And I called the vicar for clergy. And I was just like, I can't believe that at one point there was 1 priest at St. Anne's. There's only 80 families. I'm like, I said to the vicar, I said, what did that priest do? And this vicar general, as like quick as he possibly goes, he drank. What do you think he did? He drank. When we had a surplus of priests, when there was a surplus of religious sisters, there also was a thought of, we don't need priests. We'll always have enough. Lastly, the reality is that I'm a sinner, and so is every single priest. And the reality is that there are many priests that have done horrific, evil, immoral crimes and should be flogged, if not by someone else, by themselves, out of repentance for the sins that they have committed. And although the number of these priests is small, it has tainted the entire face of the priesthood. As you know, I walk everywhere in my cassock, and the looks that I get are not often awe and reverence. They're often looks of scandal and disdain. Yet the reality is that the priesthood is awesome. I love being a priest. I mean, I really do. Like, I think it's one of the best lives that there could ever be. And yet many people think that lives of a priest are boring and lonely and dull, and you can't have sex, and you're just completely overworked, and like, it's just such a hard life. And that is all a lie. I go to East Central High School for 2.5 hours every single day. Why? Because if I didn't, I would be bored. I get to go and do what I love doing on top of doing what I love to do all the time. If you ever hear a priest complain that he is busy or overworked, he is not. He just has no idea how to organize his life, and he doesn't have priorities, and he's probably not praying. And that's his own fault. We as priests are not overworked. And we have amazing lives. The harvest is tremendously abundant. But the reality is that laborers are few, and projections say they're getting fewer. So what should our response be? 3 things. First, I want you to look around, because this right here has to be our first response. We have to create dynamic parishes, and we have to be creative, and we have to instill best practices, and we have to look at what God has done here, and we need to share it with the rest of the world. What God has done at All Saints Parish needs to be a model for a lot of parishes. And some of you remember days at St. Joseph, St. John, St. Paul's, or St. Martin's where you would go to church and the church was more empty than full. I love reading our bulletin right now and looking at our mass attendances, and we have that one column that subtracts how many actual seats we have and then how many people were actually here. Like 1 week, we had only 100 available seats the entire weekend. And I was just like, that's awesome. Like, that says that we're alive and that God is doing great things and that, like, it's all possible. But we have to be willing to get our pride and our stubbornness and our closed-mindedness out of the way. A woman last night at the 4:30 Mass came out. She had tears in her eyes. She's from another diocese, and they're shutting down her parish. And she said, "Father, how did you all do this here?" And I pointed her directly to Christine Eppert, and I said, "Go talk to her." I said, "We are willing to share answers. We are willing to share best practices. But the reality is that God can work miracles in the midst of what seems like depravity." Number 2, pray and invite. And I'm putting the 2 of them intentionally together. Pray and invite. We have got to pray. What does the passage say? The harvest is abundant, laborers are few. So ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for the harvest. He means that to all of you. I'm preaching this homily because Jesus says that you are supposed to be asking the master of the harvest to send out laborers. And not just at Mass when we have a prayer petition. But every day you should be asking God to send out laborers into the harvest. The reality is that everybody here wants someone to hear their confession when they're in sin. Every single one of you wants to receive the Eucharist. Every single one of you wants your baby baptized. Every single one of you wants a Catholic priest to anoint you and give you confession at the moment that you're dying and to bury you. So ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers to his harvest. Every day. And with prayer has to be the invitation. Now, many of you know that I stand here today because of my great Aunt Dee. She's a totally holy woman, and none of her nephews or nieces became sisters or priests, so then she moved on to the second tier. And she chose me out of all of my nephews, out of all my cousins, for some reason, and she prayed for me every time she went to perpetual adoration that I'd be a priest. I am here solely because of her prayers, and I totally am convinced of that. We have to pray and we have to invite. I want you to genuinely invite young men and young women to consider being a religious sister or a priest. You look at them in the eyes and you say, you have tremendous qualities, and I think God could use those qualities. Being asked to be a priest or a religious sister should be the greatest compliment that one could ever receive. To minister and serve in the name of Christ. Lastly, we need to continue to foster and strengthen our families and our marriages. There's certain things that statistically prove or have shown that lead to young men and young women answering God's call to holiness and vocations in the priesthood of religious life. One is perpetual adoration. We got that. Two, a strong, vibrant youth ministry program. We have that. In fact, above and beyond that, we're the only parish in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis that offers a retreat for young girls every single year where we literally fly in religious sisters so that our young ladies can spend time with joyful, happy nuns. We have an amazing altar server program. But what we need to continue to foster is the strengthening of marriages and the strengthening of family life, which is quintessential to the fostering of vocations and the encouragement of young people in the faith. My dear brothers and sisters, the harvest is abundant, but laborers are few. Ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for his harvest. You don't need to go on a bike journey. You don't need to bike 1,000 miles. But you do need to be on your knees. You do need to be inviting and encouraging, building up the church as God has called us, to raise up worthy ministers to serve in his name. Through God's grace, may it be so.